If that is the case, so if President Trump comes back into office and they do take a more crypto-friendly approach, clearly that would improve the odds for an XRP ETF and other spot crypto ETFs as well.
This episode is brought to you by Uphold, which is one of the top crypto platforms in the industry. I've been a user of Uphold since 2018. They make it easy to buy, sell, and trade crypto. They have 300 plus cryptocurrencies on their platform, which includes Bitcoin and all the top altcoins. And folks, they do not commingle. They do not lend out your funds. They are 100% reserved, and you can review their transparency report. And they have a lot of great features that make it easy to execute your trades. They also have a great new product called USD interest accounts, which allows you to park your dry powder or your crypto profits and earn up to 4.9% APY. Now, the 4.9% APY is only on balances over $1,000. Below $1,000, it's 2%. But what's great about this product, guys, is there's no lockups, there's no monthly fees, there's no subscriptions, and best of all, it is FDIC insured just like a bank. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold, visit the link in the description. Welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and with me is Nate Geraci, who's the president of the ETF Store and the co-founder of the ETF Institute. Nate, it's great to see you.
Yeah, it's so good to be back.
Yeah, Nate, I know we've been trying to schedule this, but we've both been busy. But I had to get you on to talk about the options that were approved for the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF and what the hell that means. And is it good? Is it bad? And so forth. So tell us about this, Nate. You're the expert here. And what does this mean for the ETF around Bitcoin?
Well, first of all, as you mentioned, the SEC did sign off on options trading for the iShares Bitcoin Trust, IBIT. That was in September. And my understanding is that we still need the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and the Options Clearing Corporation, the OCC, to also sign off on this. Now, as we sit here today, I have yet to see a definitive timeline on when that might happen. I don't believe one exists. I believe both the CFTC and OCC can operate on their own schedules. But I think the prevailing thought is this should happen by the end of the year or perhaps the first part of 2025. By the way, before we talk about the importance of options trading for Bitcoin ETFs, I have to note, I think this is important, and I know you'll appreciate this, having covered the regulatory side of crypto for a long time. Options trading actually exists right now on 2 times leveraged spot Bitcoin ETFs. Yeah. I'm not kidding. There are all sorts of other ETFs like 0 days to expiration options-based ETFs that actually have options trading on them. And so to me, it just shows you how convoluted and even ridiculous the regulatory approach has been around the entire crypto ETF space. I think that's important to mention because, in my opinion, there is no reason why options trading on spot Bitcoin ETF shouldn't exist right now. So I just want to put that out there. Now, in terms of the potential impact here, I think that options trading on spot Bitcoin ETFs is decidedly good because all options trading is going to do is deepen the liquidity around spot Bitcoin ETFs, and it's going to bring more players into the space. I would say especially institutional players, okay? And so to me, it just makes the entire spot Bitcoin ETF ecosystem that much more robust. And so let's take institutional investors as an example. You know, think about the types of investors in this space. They're very well versed on hedging and implementing more complex strategy. Options trading is very important in both of those. And I would say even more so with a volatile asset such as Bitcoin. And so I think what's going to happen is you have institutional investors who want exposure to spot Bitcoin ETFs, but they want to have the ability to hedge against some of that volatility. That's where something like options trading comes in. And I would say, even if we look over to the retail side with retail investors, more sophisticated retail investors, they want options trading as well for the same reasons. And so I just see this as bringing in more investors to the spot Bitcoin ETF category overall.
Mm. Now, obviously, this is a big thing for institutional investors, but can retail also use this?
They can, yeah. Once these options are approved, anybody who has options approval at their particular brokerage will have the ability to trade spot Bitcoin ETF options.
Mm. Now, are there any downsides? I've heard rumblings and rumors that things like this have been used to manipulate markets over time, like precious metals. I don't know if there's any validity to that, but I'm just asking, to get some perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, but in my opinion, I would say no, because again, as I was just describing, I think what options trading does is it brings in more players to the ecosystem and different types of players. To me, that actually would make it to where manipulation would be less of an issue because you have, again, different types of parties now trading these. So I just don't see that as something that is a concern.
Got it. Okay. I appreciate that clarity. Now, options, a big product, right, that's going to go out for these ETFs. Um, I know right now is just the BlackRock one that's in play. Do you expect the other filers to have these like,
I,
Fidelity and so forth?
for sure. I think the assumption is that everybody else would have options trading approval as well. I don't think there's any question about that.
Hmm. Now, what other types of products are you expecting, given that the ETFs are live? We've seen a lot of inflows, and you got the options about to get approved. What other products do you anticipate may roll out in 2025?
See, this is where I think things get extremely interesting because I think we're going to see every flavor of options-based strategies coming to market for Bitcoin ETFs and ultimately spot Ether ETFs as well, once options trading is approved on those. And the way I would describe this, Tony, is if you look at the ETF space overall right now, so all types of ETFs, one of the single biggest growth areas where we're seeing the most new launches and significant inflows is on options-based strategies.
Mm.
And so if you think about this, that's already a growth area of ETFs overall. And then we know the type of success that spot Bitcoin ETFs, just as its own category has had, with something like 19 billion in inflows. And so if you combine those two things together, right, the popularity of options-based strategies in general, and then the popularity of spot Bitcoin ETFs, I'm just telling you, I have no doubt we're going to see a ton of options-based Bitcoin ETFs come to market.
Mm.
And just to give you an idea, so what might that look like? I think we're going to see covered call strategy Bitcoin ETFs. I think we're going to see buffer or defined outcome Bitcoin ETFs, where what those are, you'll have an upside cap. They'll say, okay, we'll give you Bitcoin's return, say up to 25%, and then it will protect you from some of the downside moves. Those are what buffer or defined outcome ETFs. I think we'll see those. I think we'll see tail risk Bitcoin ETFs, where the products are simply used to hedge to the downside, a big downside move in spot Bitcoin ETFs. I think we'll see what are called convexity ETFs, where these will hold a spot Bitcoin ETF and then they're going to buy way out of the money calls on the upside or way out of the money puts on the downside. And the idea here is to basically amplify extreme up moves or protect against big down moves. So the point is, I think we're going to see it all. I think you're going to see every flavor of options-based strategy come to market. And I think these are going to resonate with investors somewhat because of what I just described to you before, in that the volatility of Bitcoin, well, I view it as a positive in the context of a portfolio. There are a lot of investors who view it as a negative. And these options-based strategies can be used to help minimize some of that volatility. I think that's going to be attractive to bringing in, again, another type or another pool of investor.
That's interesting. And some of the ETFs you mentioned there, I've never heard before. So that's fascinating, but it's exciting at the same time. And to see these things roll out. So at the end of the day, this is all good. The TLDR is brings in a lot of liquidity and gives more options to institutional investors.
100%. Think about the spot Bitcoin ETF category in and of itself right now, last I checked, it's about a $57 billion category. And that's without options trading. And that's without any of these products on the market right now. And so I just look at the longer term growth of this category overall. Yeah, all this is going to do is continue to bring in different types of investors. And I just think this is going to continue to be a growth area overall.
Now, Nate, it's been we're approaching the end of the year, and we have seen significant inflows into these ETFs. They've been the fastest growing and so forth. How is the ETF industry reacting to this, given that, what are we now, over 6 months, from the launch? Are people now like, whoa, okay, I need to pay attention to this? Are you getting more phone calls and so forth?
Yeah, I think overall, look, clearly the spot Bitcoin ETFs, you and I have talked about this before. I don't think there's any way to characterize those other than a massive success. We're talking $19 billion in net inflows. These products have only been on the market since January. So I think that it's really opened some eyes around the industry for people who maybe were skeptical previously. That certainly has grabbed their attention. On the spot Ether ETF side, look, that category's actually had about 600 million in outflows. But if you look at what's going on there, about 3 billion of that has been from the Grayscale Ethereum Trust. And you look at the iShares Ethereum ETF, ETHA, that's over $1 billion in inflows. So I actually view that category as a success as well. I just think maybe it's going to take a little bit longer to educate investors on Ethereum and why to own Ether and those sorts of things. But Tony, I think from an industry perspective, this has been viewed as a massive success. And I think as we head towards the end of the year and into 2025, what's interesting is that, put options trading aside, which we've already discussed, keep in mind that a lot of the major wirehouse platforms have yet to even approve these products. Yeah. I think that's a really important point because these large wirehouse platforms control trillions of dollars of wealth. And once they fully open that up to allow their advisors to recommend spot Bitcoin and spot Ether ETFs to all of their clients, that's another potential distribution channel. The other thing, I know we've discussed this before as well, but I think it bears repeating, in the advisory space, in the institutional investor arena, the due diligence process, it just takes a long time. Sure. And in an emerging asset class such as Bitcoin, advisory firms, they want to see a track record there. They want to see these products trading for a while. They want to get comfortable with educating their clients on Bitcoin and Ether. And I know for maybe somebody like you or I who have been in the crypto space for a while, that may seem like, well, that should be easy. What's taking so long? I'm just telling you, that's not how advisors and institutional investors operate. And so the way to view that is not as a negative. The way to view that is actually as a real positive, because we have seen these inflows and the wirehouse platforms aren't open up. There's still this ongoing due diligence process among advisors and institutional investors. That should be looked at as a real catalyst for this category moving forward.
Yeah, great points. And yeah, they're not going to move as fast as some of us who just, let's go buy Bitcoin and Coinbase. Like, no, it's not going to be that
just
simple.
Doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Okay, Nate, we got to talk XRP ETFs. I didn't see this coming. But maybe there was a hint of Grayscale relaunching their XRP trust. But Bitwise filed for an XRP spot ETF. Then Canary Funds, if that's the right name, also filed. What's happening here? I thought it was going to be Solana. Van Eck had jumped in the game with Solana, but then they withdrew it. Now a bunch of XRP ETFs filings are out.
I'm a little bit all over the place on this. So I'll offer you a few thoughts and maybe we can unpack a couple of these if there's anything of interest. So I still, as we sit here today, I believe these filings are essentially a call option on the November election. And very simply, what I mean by that is these two issuers, and my expectation is we'll see additional XRP ETF filings, but they're getting in line now in case we get a Trump administration. Because former President Trump, as you know, his message that his administration would be much more friendly to crypto.
Hmm.
If that is the case, so if President Trump comes back into office and they do take a more crypto-friendly approach, clearly that would improve the odds for an XRP ETF and other spot crypto ETFs as well.
Sure.
But I think we also have to recognize that this is all speculation because we can't just assume that Trump comes into office and he waves a magic wand and all of these things are approved, right?
Yeah.
But I would say for anybody who has followed the crypto space over the past several years, it has been crystal clear that the current administration has been hostile towards crypto overall, right? We know that. And I think the assumption is that a Harris administration would continue that. Now, again, I think we have to say that could be wrong, right? It is possible that Harris comes in and takes a much friendlier stance. But I think just we have to go by what we have seen up to this point, go by actions and not words. And the actions from the current administration, of which Harris is a part, is that I don't think we can count on anything being different moving forward. Now, I'll offer you a couple of other points. Let's say we do get a Trump administration. Even then, it is unclear what path XRP ETFs would have to walk to gain SEC approval.
Right.
And I know I keep saying this, you and I have had these conversations in the past, but right now there are no CME traded XRP futures contracts. And the way that spot Bitcoin and spot Ether ETFs came to market is first we had the CME traded futures contracts, then we had futures-based ETFs, and then we had the spot ETFs. And even then, it took a grayscale lawsuit, right, and a court victory to push the SEC to approval on the spot Bitcoin ETFs, which then led to approval on the spot Ether ETFs. We don't right now have any of that with XRP, other than, of course, the grayscale court victory. And so I know this is a long-winded, but the way I think about this is maybe a Trump administration comes in and they quickly designate which crypto assets are securities and which aren't. That would be fantastic. But even then, the SEC is going to want a surveillance sharing agreement in place with the exchanges that XRP trades on. Right now, those crypto exchanges are unregulated. So how does that work, right? My point, Tony, is that this doesn't just happen overnight, I don't think. And then the last wild card, which I know you've tracked very closely, is the SEC's Ripple case.
Yeah.
And if you look at that, I mean, essentially what they're saying is once these tokens are out in the wild, they're not securities anymore, right? I mean, that's how I interpret it at this point. And so if that is the case, you could say, okay, well then XRP looks a lot like Bitcoin in that regard, which the SEC has clearly stated is a non-security commodity, right? So is XRP a non-security commodity? If that's the case, does that change anything? Maybe. I think I could mount an argument that, yeah, maybe that does change things, but then I get back into, well, we're still going to need that surveillance sharing agreement with the exchanges, which are unregulated. And so you can see I'm jumping all over the place here. But I think we have to go by what we have seen from the SEC up to this point and how they have operated as it pertains to crypto ETFs. And I'm just not overly optimistic, as we sit here today. Hopefully I'm wrong and things evolve quickly. I think, I still believe that the best path for the entire industry is for Congress to implement a real regulatory framework that clearly spells out which crypto assets are securities and which aren't, and what rules they want crypto exchanges operating under, just really detailing how the industry should operate. I think that would be beneficial for everybody, but we don't have that right now.
Great points, Nate. And you're spot on, because I just had Commissioner Hester Peirce on the podcast and after the hearing with Congress, and I asked her the question, is futures market required for these spot ETFs to get approved? She's like, not necessarily, but that's how we've been doing it. So,
that's right. Exactly right. Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. I think there's a path where we don't need futures, but she's exactly right. That is how the SEC is operated. And so somebody, I try to just follow logic. I follow logic on tracking the spot Ether ETF approval. I'm trying to apply that to what we're seeing to XRP ETFs right now. You just have to go off of what the SEC has done. And again, if we get a new administration, that certainly we put in a new SEC chair, that could change the way they approach the space. But I still don't see that happening overnight. And so I still think that we have a fairly long runway here towards approval.
Yeah, and I would even add that with Ethereum, I thought the consensus lawsuit, proactive lawsuit against the SEC was a factor in them approving those Ethereum ETFs because I remember it was very last minute and consensus going after them. I think Legilex out of Texas was filing a lawsuit. So it took some legal push to get them to do these things. So they weren't willing to just simply give an approval stamp. And the SEC is tied up with Ripple in an appeal right now. So we'll see.
Yeah, I still have a little bit of a different take on the spot Ether ETFs. I mean, I was fairly optimistic all along because I went back to the grayscale lawsuit
Hmm.
on the spot Bitcoin ETF, and everything looked the exact same with spot Ether ETFs, and that we did have CME traded Ether futures. We had CME traded futures-based ETFs. The SEC approved those in October. I didn't see how they could not approve spot Ether ETFs without then facing another lawsuit. So I'm not sure the consensus uh, legal situation played into that. It could have. I don't know, and I don't know that for a fact.
Sure.
I think the SEC was backed into a corner on the spot Ether ETFs.
Now, the Solana ETFs, if I'm not mistaken, it was just Van Eck, but they withdrew it. Are you hearing anything about that? If any other players might submit and throw their hat in the ring?
Yeah, I think this is really the same discussion as we just had with XRP, which is simply whether or not Solana is a security.
Mm,
And, clearly, again, based on everything that we have seen, the current SEC believes Solana is a security.
mm,
And so with those filings, there were actually two. So there were 19B4s filed, 21 shares, and then Van Eck both filed, and those were withdrawn. So, and actually, it was SIBO, the exchange, that filed the 19B4s. And the SEC essentially told SIBO these had no shot at being approved. And so those were withdrawn. I don't know that I have anything insightful to offer here, other than, again, I think that it's going to have to walk the same path that we just talked about with
yeah.
XRP ETFs. It's all the same factors and all the same variables here.
Mm,
I will tell you what's a little frustrating, and not to get on a soapbox, Tony, but you look overseas, like you look over to the EU, and I was just visiting earlier this week with the head of U.S. business at 21 Shares,
mm,
and they were talking about the regulatory environment over in Europe. And if you look over there, 21 Shares, I'm just using them as an example. They have Solana ETFs and Cardano ETFs and all sorts of different products. And it's just a shame that we can't embrace crypto innovation here in the US. And I've always talked about how I completely understand it's a balance between innovation and regulation. I think that's important, right? You can't just say innovate, 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 because some people can get hurt on that if you don't have the appropriate guardrails. But what we have done, in my opinion, is regulate, regulate, regulate. And we haven't embraced innovation at all. And so it's just frustrating to me that we have to have these types of conversations, and that we can't have more of an open dialogue with regulators about how we bring XRP ETFs and Solana ETFs to market. It's all just so combative
mm.
right now. And my hope is moving forward that changes. It does seem like the approach to crypto regulation may be in the early stages of thawing in Washington, D.C. I hope that's the case. I mean, I think we have seen a few early indications, but I think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, there have been some rumblings. I saw even like a Democrat, Chuck Schumer, saying, "Hey, by the end of the year," Patrick McHenry saying, "Lame duck session. They'll try to get something through the Senate." Don't know if that's going to happen, but it seems there's movement. But obviously, ultimately, you still need a president to sign it into law. So we'll see what happens. Maybe things align where, look, I don't want to get political, but Trump is pro crypto, and then the Senate gets it through and becomes law.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, I mean, just look at the SAB 121 that was vetoed. You know, what I
Yeah.
mean, to me, this is a very basic idea in that we have highly regulated, trusted financial institutions who want to custody crypto. And I know there's now some exemptions that have been given to, you know, BNY Mellon and banks like that, which is great. But the point is, why did it have to come to that?
Yeah.
Why would we not want our biggest, most trusted financial institutions to have the ability to custody crypto? You know, that would benefit just, I think about the ETF space, having more custodians in the ETF space, not having a single potential point of failure in somebody like Coinbase. It just doesn't make sense to me. And so to your point, man, that's an easy one where we can say things are thawing, and I do think they're starting to, but it wasn't that long ago. We just had a veto of SAB 121. So that's, you can probably sense my frustration. It's just hard for me to get my head around some of the actions. It still seems pretty hostile overall.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. You have, you know, it's so funny because you have these, like you said, regulated trust institutions that have been around for a long time. BNY Mellon, America's oldest bank, the largest custodian. They can't custody Bitcoin for BlackRock. Like what?
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense, right? And it's important for innovation because think about the competition that brings into the space around, in this case, just custodying crypto. That's a good thing. Competition fosters innovation, right? You have these custodians have to figure out the best way, obviously, to securely store crypto, how to do it in a very cost-effective manner. All of that ultimately benefits the end investor. And that's again where my frustration comes in. It's like, are we truly trying to protect investors here, or are there other forces at play, particularly political forces? And it just seems like there's a lot more on the political force side versus let's try to protect investors.
Mm. Final question here for you, Nate. Do you, let's say middle of 2025, do you see the total inflows being over 30 billion or over 25 billion for Bitcoin, and ETH maybe over 5 or 10 billion?
Yes, and this is not any sort of price prediction. I always have to be careful there because I am a regulated investment advisor, but I do. I've mentioned several times that we've had, you know, almost $20 billion into the spot Bitcoin ETFs. I only expect that to continue. And if you think about that, I mean, Bitcoin has had a good year, but the price of Bitcoin has really bounced around quite a bit over the past several months, including, you know, a decent down move. So I don't think we need the price of Bitcoin to go up in order to get those inflows. I think the factors that I described before, just in terms of advisors and institutional investors getting more comfortable with spot Bitcoin ETFs and going through their due diligence process, I think wirehouse platforms opening up access, those are going to be the catalyst. But, you know, look, if we do get any sort of meaningful upward move in the price of Bitcoin and Ether, I don't think I think 25 billion, 30 billion is going to be an absolute layup. I mean, we could hit that by the end of the year if we get a decent up move. So,
Sure.
you know, going back to the spot Ether space, you know, like I'm still bullish on this category overall. And I will say shorter term, the inflows have been disappointing. I don't think that, you know, there's any question about that. But I've told you in the past that if you look at the relative market cap of Ether to Bitcoin, right now, Ether is about 25% of the market cap of Bitcoin. That's a reasonable proxy for where I think demand for spot Ether ETFs should end up longer term relative to spot Bitcoin ETFs. And so I just think we're early. I think that Bitcoin, it's much easier for advisors to get their head around this, you know, sort of the digital gold narrative and understand that. I view Ether as much more of a technology play, but I think it's more difficult for advisors and investors to go, okay, do I replace some of my stock exposure with an Ether ETF, or, you know, does my Ether ETF replace some of my gold or alts exposure? It's just a little more complicated. I don't think it's overly complex. It's just more of a complicated you know, decision process. And so I think it'll just take a little bit more time, but longer term, I don't see any reason why the spot Ether ETF demand wouldn't look like the underlying market, right? So right now that's 25% of what Bitcoin is.
As you're saying that, I was thinking about an RIA trying to explain to their client of what a smart contract is on Ethereum, but versus Bitcoin, digital gold. People understand what the gold as a hedge, right? And you say Bitcoin's digital gold, hard cap on the blockchain, pretty straightforward. But hey, smart contract software platform that you can tokenize on, and people's heads are going to start spinning. Like what?
They do, and then you'll get questions along the lines of, okay, well, how is Ether different from Solana or other chains, and which one's going to win? I mean, you and I could have a full discussion around that, but the point is, I think Bitcoin is just a much easier narrative, to tell a story around. Doesn't make it better or worse. I just think from an advisor or the TradFi perspective, it's a bit easier to get your head around.
Yeah, absolutely. Nate, great stuff. You also launched a new podcast. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, thank you for mentioning that. I'm really excited. The podcast is Crypto Prime. It's at cryptoprimepodcast.com. And very simply, the goal of this podcast is I want to serve as a bridge between TradFi and DeFi. I feel like there needs to be more education in this space, and particularly on the TradFi side. There's a lot of skepticism that TradFi has of the crypto space. And I want to have a platform where we have guests on that can explain what's going on in the crypto ecosystem in plain English in a manner that is open and TradFi can understand. It's really that simple. It's funny because obviously I've covered the ETF space for a long time now. And one of the reasons I was such a proponent of the spot crypto ETFs coming to market is I view those as a bridge between TradFi and DeFi. The thought being that if you could have TradFi investors give them the ability to easily access something like Bitcoin or Ether in a way that they're comfortable and familiar with, that would allow them to start becoming educated on Bitcoin and Ether. And maybe that would get them interested in going down the rabbit hole that you and I have been down on crypto, right? It was a bridge to get people on the TradFi side interested in the crypto side. I'm sort of viewing Crypto Prime, my podcast, in the same manner.
Hmm.
And that I just want to serve as that bridge, help educate the market. This is not going to be a podcast about, shilling coins and pumping and anything like that. I want to have true knowledge experts from across the space on to explain things in a manner that people can understand. And hopefully on the crypto side, people will appreciate it as well, because I think longer term, you and I have talked about tokenization and where this is all heading longer term. I still believe that longer term securities will be tokenized. I think our financial ecosystem will be tokenized. And so I think it's important for crypto to also become educated on the TradFi side as well, right? These two things are going to meld together. And so my hope is that the podcast can also serve as a bridge in that fashion as well, to where crypto-centric investors and people in the space can also learn about the TradFi side as well. So thank you for mentioning that. I'm really excited about it, and encourage everybody to go check it out.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll link in the description, everyone, so you can go check it out. It will also be on the website as well. Nate, always great stuff, man. I appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Always enjoy it.